But I hope you all had a lovely summer, and thank you for joining the first of our autumn-winter series of the ETC Network Lunchtime Information Sessions. My name is Anya Whelan, and I'm an EU Project Officer with the Southern Regional Assembly, and I facilitate the ETC network along with my colleague Lisa Moran, and I will be your moderator for today's session. To all our new attendees and first timers at an ETC network event, the ETC network is a forum for ETC project officers in EU programs and projects, or those interested in EU projects, particularly in the southern region, to learn, share experiences, and network with each other. A few points on housekeeping before we start. As a participant, you are muted and your camera is turned off during this webinar. However, we welcome your questions. You will notice at the top of your screen, there is a Q&A option that will allow you to ask questions to today's speakers. I will be moderating the Q&A function and I will approve your questions as they come in. You are welcome to ask questions throughout the presentation, and then I will pose the questions to our speaker at the end in a dedicated Q&A section after the presentation. If you are having any problem with using the Q&A function, you can actually use the chat option as well, which we are also moderating. But we would encourage you to please use the Q&A function if it is working for you. But if you are having any sort of problems on your side, you can use the chat option. But most of all, we really encourage you to ask questions. We will endeavour to answer as many questions as possible. Any questions not answered will be collected from the question box and they will be addressed directly with the presenter, and we will forward on a response to you as soon as possible. If you are experiencing any technical problems throughout, please let us know in the chat box, which my colleague Maria is monitoring. Today's session is being recorded, and along with the slides from today's presentation will be sent to you after the event. So without further ado, I am delighted to welcome today's speaker, and someone I am sure many of you will be familiar with, as she previously facilitated this very network, Rose Power. Rose is an administrative officer in the EU Programme Division of the Southern Regional Assembly, with responsibility for the Southern, Eastern and Midland Regional Programme 2021 to 2027, and in particular, Priority 3, Sustainable Integrated Urban Development, Do No Significant Harm Principles, Climate Proofing, Selection of Operations and Simplified Cost Options. Rose is also a member of the Monitoring Committee for the Rural Development Programme 2014 to 2020 and Ireland's CAP Strategic Plan 2023 to 2027. Rose previously worked as the EU Projects Officer for the Southern Regional Assembly with responsibility for low-carbon projects. Prior to this, Rose worked as a senior researcher with the Southeast Technological University on proposal development for European co-funded projects. She has over 25 years business and financial consultancy and industry experience, both in Ireland and the UK, and is a business model strategist and project management expert, designing, developing and implementing innovative business models for SMEs across a wide range of industries and sectors. Rose holds a Bachelor of Business in Studies degree in Accounting and Finance from the University of Limerick and a postgraduate diploma in Public Management from University College Dublin. Rose is going to present to us today on tips and tricks for writing a successful EU project application from the perspective of ETC Interreg projects. And I'm delighted now to hand the floor over to Rose. Thank you.
Anya, thanks very much for your kind introduction there. I'm just going to put my presentation in presentation mode, so you should all be able to see that there now. So thank you again, Anya, for your introduction. Today, hopefully, is an opportunity for me to share with you some of my experience of working in EU projects, and more recently in my role as an evaluator and assessor of EU project applications across a number of ETC. And I suppose there's a lot of common mistakes that people make, and these seem to be common sense. However, from my experience of evaluating applications, they are getting repeated year after year. So I'm going to try and take you through some practical examples. And as Anya mentioned earlier, by all means, at any stage, put your questions in the Q&A tab, and I'll do my very best to actually try and provide you with as many answers on a practical basis that might help you with your applications. So then, what do EU applications for funding have in common? The ones that are successful. So firstly, it is very clear from these applications that each of the partners that are participating in the consortium for the funding, their objective is being met and they're aligned to the call objectives, okay? So what does this actually mean? So it means that partners are not just applying for EU funding for the sake of EU funding, but they've actually done their research and they've aligned their objectives with this particular call, and that they match. And by doing so, not only do they achieve the ambitions of the call, but they also achieve the ambitions of their organisation. Secondly, they've set out in a clear manner and logical manner how the actions and the activities that they're going to undertake will deliver those objectives, okay? So it's not just good enough to see what objective you have and that it matches the actual call, but the activities then and the actions that you undertake must also then coincide with the delivery of those objectives. Thirdly, they're easy to read, okay? And this is really, really important, particularly where you have evaluators looking at multiple applications. You know, they have to be understood. They have to be written in clear in English, and you have to make it as easy as possible for the evaluator to not only understand your application, but also to score it as strongly as possible in relation to the call criteria. Next, it needs to provide a clear rationale for every single project partner's involvement in the application. Okay, there should be no partners participating in an application just to make up numbers. It needs to be clear that they're being brought in specifically for their expertise, for the demonstration site they can make available, for their knowledge, for the technology that they can bring to the application. So all of them need to have a role within the actual project, and there needs to be a clear rationale for why they're there. The project application needs to be innovative in nature, okay? Now, this doesn't necessarily mean technology. We're not talking about IT here. It could be an innovative process, an innovative design, innovative co-creation or communication mechanisms. So that's what when we talk about innovation, that's what needs to be there. And it needs to build on what's already been done to date. So you can't go looking for funding for funding's sake. What are you bringing to the table? What's new that you're going to create as a result of this EU funding that you're going to hopefully secure? And finally, the project needs to have the ability to be scaled up or replicated in other regions, cities, or towns, so that the EU can see the long-term benefit of actually investing in your project. Okay, so in my opinion, these are probably the 6 areas that very easily any project application could enhance to ensure their success in the evaluation phase. So I'm going to take each of those on an individual basis now. So your call objectives, how can you ensure that the objectives match the call, right? So before you start any application, my first tip for you is that you should be able to, in one sentence, set out what your objective is before you start even looking at EU funding. So what is it that you want to achieve for your organisation as a result of your participation in an EU project application? If you cannot explain that clearly in one sentence, then you're either unsure of your objectives or you're unsure of how these potentially will align to a call objective, okay? So you need to be clearly able to state, why do you need to achieve this particular objective? How critical is this objective to your success or the future of your work or the research that you want to undertake? Okay, so you need to be able to, in that one sentence, be able to clearly articulate what it is you want to achieve. And then at that stage, you can take a look at doing your research, your background research into the EU funding calls that are available, okay? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to make sure that you pick a call and a program that allows you to deliver on that objective, okay? I won't have much time today to set out in relation to your, excuse me, I won't have much time today to go into that particular area, but some of the future lunchtime sessions will do that, okay? I suppose remember not to try and fit a square peg into a round hole. I know from looking at EU project applications that it's very obvious where someone had maybe an original objective that they then started tweaking in order to actually fit the call objectives. And you will see that clearly because you'll be able to do a quick search of the particular project partner to see what they've been doing up to now. And you'll know whether this is completely fitting in with their overall objectives, what they've done up to this point in time, or whether this is completely off the mark from where they would normally be operating. Okay. And I suppose the reason why there is so much time and effort put into this particular stage is that, first of all, there is a lot of marks to be achieved, to be looked at when somebody is assessing or evaluating your application. And the reason the EU programs will do this, they know that based on historically, they know that those applications where the project partner objectives and the program and call objectives match have by far the greatest and best outcomes for those projects. It makes it easier for the projects to deliver on what they say they're going to deliver on, and it makes all of the partners be heavily involved in all of the aspects of it. So this particular area investigation into what best fits your actual application, your actual objective is a really important starting point and shouldn't be overestimated. It shouldn't be you waiting for someone to invite you to join a project. It should be you being very clear about what you want to achieve, what your objective is, and doing your research to either find the project or the call that's open, and then the type of partners that you want to work with. And only then joining a project application. So the next area is, once you're sure of your objectives, that they match the call and the program, okay, then you need to start doing more background information and more background research, right? And this is looking at the call documents and the guidance note. This is your starting point for any project application that you're looking at. I can't underestimate the information that will be in there, okay, that will be of benefit to you. It's critical that you demonstrate how you'll deliver the call and program objectives in your applications. And I suppose just be careful that you don't assume that this is inherently understood. Spell it out in the application. The evaluators and assessors of these applications have been told to score you on this. So don't make assumptions that, oh, well, they'll know what I mean. You have to demonstrate it and you have to make it clear what you mean so that you can be scored accordingly. And I think a lot of the times people, when they're doing applications, because they're so knowledgeable about the specific thematic area or expertise, they make assumptions that the evaluator is as informed. And sometimes that's not the case. They'll be generalists and not specialists. And therefore, as a result of that, you need to make sure that they understand what it is, the information you're trying to get across. In addition to that, most of the calls will have information days made available. And that's an opportunity for you to attend an event where you get a clearer understanding of the call objectives, but also in addition to that, it gives you an opportunity to ask specific questions that you might need clarity on. Again, very useful to participate at these events. And in addition to that, don't forget your national contact points. These are the experts under specific programs, and they're invaluable as to the guidance and support that they can give you with your applications. Your next step then, once you've done that, is to sense check your application. Okay, so standing back from it and rereading it, and and making sure that you're not just stating that you're going to achieve an objective, you're demonstrating through the application how you're going to do that. So, for example, if you stated that you're going to, I don't know, use excess renewable energy from wind turbines, then where in your application are you doing your desktop review to examine what existing technology is there? Where in your application are you including study visits or technical workshops for the project partners who need to come together to co-create? Okay, so it's very important that you don't just, we will achieve this. How will you achieve it? And is that evident in your application, throughout your application, both in terms of your activities and your actions in relation to the delivery of those particular objectives? In addition to that, you need to be mindful as well. I've seen a lot of applications come that I have reviewed or evaluated on. And, it's amazing what people will put into an application as regards what they will actually achieve. Okay, so you need to be realistic. What you set forward in your application, first of all, that becomes an indicator of the success of your project, but also it needs to be achievable. It needs to be realistic, and it needs to be those things within the duration of the project. So there's no point in saying that, I don't know, 3,000 people are going to be trained in something, but that's going to take you 5 years to do it and the project finishes in 2. Okay, so just look at what you're actually saying in the application. Don't try to be overly ambitious. An evaluator would much prefer to see lower figures in relation to what you will achieve, but that those achievements are realistic and achievable. If they look at a project that has absolutely off the wall targets or milestones or whatever, they'll score them down, because all of a sudden it will put into question the delivery of all other aspects of your actual project. Okay, so just bear in mind that whatever you put in there, you will be measured on, but also you'll be evaluated on. And if it appears to be completely unachievable or unrealistic, then it will be scored accordingly. Okay. So next, it needs to be easy to understand. Okay, what you think and what you say and what's understood by an evaluator can be 3 different things. Okay, so please remember who your audience is. The evaluators or assessors that are looking at your application, they will have multiple applications to review, and you'll know from putting these together, some of these are hundreds of pages long. Okay, the evaluators can't be an expert in very, very specific areas. Okay, particularly when you start getting very technical with some of the applications. Okay, they'll have a broad understanding of the subject matter, but they would not maybe be considered an international expert on that specific area. So, for example, you could have an evaluator who's a thematic expert in energy efficiency, but they may not be an expert, say, in thermal insulation. Okay, so be mindful that the evaluators of your application may not be as expert as you are in your field. Okay, so what's generally useful to do is to get a non-expert in the field to read your application for understanding. Okay, that way they can highlight for you areas. If they felt areas were difficult to understand, then it's likely that your evaluator may well feel the same way about those particular areas. So I think that's a useful tip. Try to avoid using acronyms. Now, I know this, there are word counts in relation to all of your applications, and sometimes we do need to use them, okay? But if you're going to use them, then you must explain them in longhand the first time they're seen in the application, okay? So that your evaluator knows precisely what you're talking about. You don't want to stop your evaluator reading and going online and checking out what an acronym is because you haven't explained it to them, because you're taking them away from your application and you're making it less easy for them to understand, okay? Try to use short sentences. Sometimes you can see sentences that are half a page long. Okay, the evaluator has lost your train of thought if that's the case. So use the short sentences and start each paragraph with a specific point and then develop the point within the paragraph. In addition, because the evaluators are coming from across Europe, they are looking at your application, and while they're fluent in English, English is not necessarily their first language, so please avoid jargon at all possible. They won't necessarily get your jargon, and it will make it more difficult for them to fairly evaluate and score your application. Try to make sure that your application also has a logical flow, okay? It'll make it easier for the assessor to read it. Sometimes when you're reading applications, the person that's writing them is jumping around in relation to what they're trying to say. Try and look back on your application and make sure that your application is logically flowing and one paragraph is building on the next paragraph and so on, so that it provides an easy way for the evaluator to understand what it is you're trying to achieve. Try and be consistent as well in your application. I suppose a recent example of this that I have seen is most project applications look for the project partner's name to be abbreviated or given a project partner number. And I had one application recently that even though they gave an abbreviation for the organization for a particular partner, they actually refer to that partner as 4 different names throughout the document. Now, you can imagine on this particular application, there was 20 partners and 10 associate partners. So you multiply that out and see how difficult it is for a third party to come along and read it when you're not even being consistent with how you're referring to specific partners. So again, and this sometimes happens because applications there's different iterations of it, and somebody starts off calling themselves something and then they change it to something else. But somebody has to go back and reread the document in its totality to see, does it make sense? Are you actually being consistent in the information that you're providing? Okay, and giving yourself the best opportunity to score as highly as possible and not not leading to confusion and lack of understanding potentially by the evaluator. So then moving on, who should be involved as a project partner? Okay, so firstly, with any of these calls, you need to meet the minimum requirements of the particular program, okay? Remember to look at it from the perspective of a specific call as opposed to the overall program, because sometimes these can be different. Sometimes for individual calls, there may be different requirements, so just bear that in mind. However, even when you've made sure that you have the necessary partners, that's only an eligibility criteria. That's not gaining you any additional scores when it comes to somebody evaluating it. So you need to look at the quality of the partners that are going to be involved in order to make sure that you're scoring as highly as possible with regard to the partners that are involved. You also need to ensure that you justify each partner's involvement. Okay, why have they been selected to join this particular project application? How will they participate in the actual project? What tasks are going to be assigned to them? And as a result of the tasks that are assigned to them, are they being assigned a fair proportion of the budget in order to carry out these tasks? Okay, so you need to not just make sure that you have the right partners, you need to make sure that there's a reason for their involvement and how they're going to contribute to the project, and that they're going to have a fair amount of the budget in order to carry out the tasks that you're assigning to them under different work programs. Okay. Also be careful about the level of external expertise and equipment budget that you're assigning to each partner. I've seen applications whereby a project partner that's involved, 70% of the budget that's assigned to them is going to an external expertise. It's hard to justify why that particular partner is then involved in the activity, because even if they have expertise, they're outsourcing all of this particular project to an external. So is it the third party that the external expert, who is the third party, should they not be the project partner in a case like that, as opposed to the project partner that you have involved? So look, just bear it in mind, there's a balance to be got between external expertise to be brought on board and the justification of the particular project partner. And if you go too far down that route, it starts to become a lot less meaningful, that project partner being involved. As strong and all, as important and all as it is to justify each project partner's involvement, you also need to be mindful of who potentially you might be missing. Okay, so what I mean by that is, if you look at your overall objective and you look at the activities and the actions that you are outlining in your application, then you need to say to yourself, well, what project partners should be involved? And are we missing somebody in this? Are you missing, say, for instance, if it's something that needs to be implemented as a policy, are you missing a regional authority or a local authority to implement it on the ground? If you're screening, say, a technology, is that screening, is an SME required to be there to screen that technology or test that technology for you? Okay, so it's bearing in mind all of these things and putting the time and effort into building that partner consortium to make sure that within your application you can justify their involvement based on their expertise, the tasks that are going to be assigned to them, and the budget that you assign to them, and that you have all of those people there. Now, I think there is another lunchtime session later on, and I'm sure Anya will go through to the ones that will be coming up, that's going to dedicate itself purely to this topic. So that's one maybe to listen in on. So what's new and innovative about your application then? And again, as I mentioned earlier, this is not necessarily about technology or IT. It could be, but it doesn't have to be restricted to that. So it could be through an innovative approach, a process, or a design. It could be an innovative business model, okay? But it also needs to be building on what's already there, okay? So I mentioned there, don't invent the wheel. But however, you can reimagine it or enhance it or improve it, okay? And it's looking at where is the state of the art at this point in time, where do you want to move it to, and how you're going to get there, and making sure that you are building on that. I've put in there the Quartus website, and that's an excellent resource for reviewing past and ongoing EU projects, okay? To see, are there existing ones in your area of expertise that you can build upon or that can enhance what they were previously doing? And also, I suppose, to make sure that you don't put in a project application that has nothing innovative in it and is very like one that has already previously been funded under EU funding. So the capacity to be replicated. So how can the EU benefit in the future from your application? And this is looking at, is it easy to replicate? Could the project be scaled up? Could the results or the technology be used throughout Europe? And it's looking at the knock-on benefit of the EU funding. And if you can demonstrate that within your application, it would obviously score more highly, okay? And you can do this by, explaining in your application that what you're doing is using open source technology, you're sharing results and best practices at EU-wide thematic events, and showing that this is not necessarily just funding that will be used to the benefit of your organisation or your local area, but can have a regional, national or European-wide benefit for the funding that they're making available. And you should also demonstrate in the application how you will document your findings, your learnings, your knowledge and your results. Okay, so explaining that maybe you will create a best practice guidebook, or that you will have a link to something online that will be available, or I know on Interreg Europe projects, ensuring that best practices are published on the policy learning platform. So looking at ways that what you create within your project and what results you achieve can be there for the future for other participants, can be built upon and can be shared to the benefit of all EU regions, be it to improve sustainability or to further research in a particular area or whatever it might be. So bearing that in mind. And then I think that's it. Apologies for the breakdown in communications earlier. I would say, just as a final thought, just remember that you need to plan your applications. There is no point in actually thinking that you can achieve this without putting any time or effort into planning. You have to prepare well in advance. And try not to leave your project submission to the last minute. There have been occasions when the uploading of applications and have had major technical problems on the day of submission. So you should be submitting well in advance, or as far in advance, certainly not the day of the close off, in case you do actually experience any technical difficulties or problems. So I just want to wish you the very best of luck with your applications, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have. And again, apologies for the beginning of the presentation. So I'll stop sharing now.
Perfect. Rose, thank you very much for that very insightful presentation with some brilliant tips and tricks for a successful EU project application writing. I know I was even taking notes myself throughout that presentation. As mentioned previously, we will share Rose's presentation with you after this event, and we'll also provide you with upcoming ETC call deadlines as well, so you will know when you can put those tips and tricks into action. We will now move on to the Q&A portion of this session. If you haven't already asked a question, please do use the Q&A function, which you should see at the top bar there on your screen. Or if you are having any difficulty accessing the Q&A, you can put your questions through chat and I will pose them to Rose. So Rose, we have two questions that have come in through the Q&A that I'll start with. So the first one is, what would be the most practical advice you could provide to someone new writing their first EU funding application? I know you've spoken about some of this throughout your presentation, but maybe you might be able to give us some further practical advice.
Okay, I think be realistic, okay? EU projects and EU funding is for not huge money. Okay, so don't be overly ambitious as to what you can achieve. Sometimes what you have to do is break down what you want to achieve long term into bite-sized pieces. Okay, look at the terms and the timing and duration of some of these calls, and some of them are not very long. They're certainly not long enough to change the world, but they can change small little pieces. So I think sometimes what people want to achieve is they want to achieve everything now, and that's not sometimes practical. First of all, there'll be limited resources, limited funding, and these things take time. So I think try to be realistic about what it is you can achieve, and look at the kind of funding and the duration of the calls, because obviously you would need to make sure, yes, you meet your objectives, but maybe it's the first step in meeting your objectives. Maybe your objective should be in 3 or 4 bite size. So looking at that, not ruling out EU funding, but looking at EU funding as a way of delivering or delivering a piece of your objective or a step in achieving your objective. And that's probably a little bit practical. Sometimes people that are not involved in EU projects think that, okay, I'm just going to apply for this and I'm going to achieve the sun, moon and stars. And sometimes that's not what's capable of happening. What's capable of happening is you're capable of doing a piece of that as a result. And it's making sure that you are not overly ambitious at the outset, because first of all, you'll probably not receive the level of funding that would be required to deliver that. But second of all, it's generally, we say, and I said in the presentation, it's building on something. So therefore, this could be the first stepping stone if you're new to EU projects, and taking something that's capable of being achieved during that duration and being realistic about it is probably the first stepping stone. So hopefully that is a little bit of practical support for somebody.
Definitely, that's great, Rose. And I think just talking to practical advice there, I see someone in the chat saying that was one of the best practical advisory presentations on preparing an application I've ever heard. So I think as reviews go, that's definitely a 10 out of 10, Rose. So we have a couple more questions, and now I know we're a little bit stuck for time, and I don't want to be cutting into people's lunches, but one here we have, Rose, is just from your own experience as an assessor of EU applications, what is the most challenging aspect as a reviewer of applications?
I think one of the more challenging aspects is trying to get into the mindset of the person that's writing it and trying to fully comprehend what it is they want to achieve. And I suppose that's why I'm harping on in this presentation about you making it easier for the evaluator. I certainly know when I look at an application that, and all evaluators are the same, you want to score these projects as highly as possible. So you give it every opportunity to try and understand what it is the person is trying to achieve. And anything you can do to make that easier for the evaluator is really, really beneficial. Now, I've found myself coming out of applications and going into Google and going, right, okay, who are these people and what are they trying to do, and trying to make sense of what they're trying to do. And I suppose if I can give any piece of advice, this whole idea of setting out what you want to achieve in one sentence, if you can do that in plain language, you can write an EU application, okay? Because you just build on that and try, okay, there are aspects that you have to get into the technicalities, because you have to show the innovation and where you're moving with regard building on something going forward. But what you also have to do is make sure that you make that understandable, and make sure that you can demonstrate the leap and the benefit of what you're trying to achieve, and understanding that. And I think that's a huge thing for an assessor. I certainly know previously on looking at applications and evaluating applications where I know inherently about different aspects, particularly in the low carbon economy, and looking at something and going, why didn't they mention this? And why didn't they mention that? But it's not actually in the application. And while we can fight for the scores, because there's always two people assessing these, it is down to you as the applicant to actually put the information in at the beginning. But we've had scenarios where we've had to fight in relation to the scoring on an application because we know something that is inherently important with regard to the application that's not necessarily understood by another EU country evaluator, and we'll go no, and we're then explaining to them what it is this person meant. That should be clearer in the application so that they can score it accordingly, and we don't, because we can't fight all the battles, and we certainly won't be allowed to win all the battles. So you need to do yourself, your best foot forward in making sure that that is there in your application to begin with.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rose. And I might just, one last question we have here is in relation to word count restrictions. Is it necessary to cite quote all references within applications for figures, percentages, etc.? I'm thinking from the point of view of more technical applications.
Okay, for more technical applications, obviously, you have to have the relevant links, and the evaluator will actually assess those links. So yes, it's important. I suppose a trick you could potentially use is whereby you download the actual reference to your own website and give it a shorter link so that it doesn't actually take up as much of the word count. There are little tricks around it, but when you get to the technical aspects of it, you have got to put the information in. And don't forget that when you're putting stuff into the application, that your assessor will actually go in and click on those links and will go in and see what it is you're talking about. So if you start, I don't know, talking about a policy instrument here in Ireland, if it's an Interreg Europe project, you can be assured the evaluator is going to go in and is going to look at that policy instrument. So you better be sure that the policy instrument in some shape or form addresses what you think it's going to address and that it actually exists. We've seen situations where policy instruments have been quoted that don't even exist. Okay, so look, be mindful. The assessor has just as much access to Google as you do, and they can delve into that. But you're right, the word count is very restrictive. And there's an art to writing these EU applications so that you can say a lot without saying a lot. But those links are necessary, unfortunately.
That's great. Thanks very much for that, Rose. So I would just like to thank you, the members of our ETC network, for your continued engagement and for your support in shaping the topics covered for our autumn-winter series of lunchtime information sessions. For those of you who are not members of the ETC network, please scan the QR code on the screen now or follow the link that Maria has just popped into the chat there to join. Also, a feedback form will be sent to all attendees after this event to review the event, along with the slides and registration links for the remaining lunchtime sessions. Our next ETC Network lunchtime session is going to be on Thursday, the 12th of October at the same time, where we will be joined by Sarah Davrin, who is an EU executive with the Southern Regional Assembly and a national contact point for Interreg Northwest Europe. Sarah is going to offer us advice on developing a successful partnership and stakeholder group for your EU project, again, from the perspective of ETC Interreg projects. If you are not registered already, you can use the QR code that you'll see there in the top right of the infographic, or follow the link Maria is going to put in the chat now. I would like to take this opportunity to thank again our presenter today, Rose. We are very grateful to you for making time to be with us today and sharing your knowledge and experience with the ETC network. And I would also like to thank Maria Murphy, who provided technical support behind the scenes today. And in the run up to this event, the support is really appreciated. I see Maria there. Thanks, Maria. So look, that concludes the first of our lunchtime information sessions. I know Rose has her contact details there at the end of the slides, and as she said, you can follow up with any other further questions that might come to you, and we will be sending out the slides and the recording in the coming week from this session. So look, I hope that you have a pleasant rest of the day, and I look forward to meeting you all again at our October session. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.